Agenda. I considered doing this the good, bad, and the ugly of the overall EV market, but I decided to go a little bit different here. So first thing, we're going to talk about EVs are coming and why are they coming into the marketplace. Second thing, how the EV market is evolving. If we had this conversation a year ago, it would have been a very, very different conversation. And we'll talk about how the market's kind of shifted over the past 12 plus months. And then talk about kind of EVs and dealer revenue. And Nathan can provide a lot of kind of interesting views on that. So EVs are coming. I feel like I've been talking about the EVs are going to be arriving as a percentage of sales. Like 2016, 2017, I believe, is when we really started talking about it. Pre-COVID, it was really kind of focused on connected, autonomous, shared electric, and how these four kind of verticals were really going to affect things. Of those four, EVs are the only one that actually looks to be kind of taking off at this point. Connected, autonomous, and shared have been kind of either delayed or don't seem to be really taking off on that space as much as have been anticipated. But EVs are really kind of coming along to the marketplace. So why do we think EVs are coming along? First thing is fuel efficiency standards. So again, these are subject to change, and we did see a little bit of shift between fuel efficiency standards during the Trump administration. I think they wanted to go to something called SAFE, and then Biden administration came on and went back to CAFE. But you can see how quickly fuel efficiency standards are going to need to rise for corporate average fuel economy over the next couple of years. And this is one of the reasons why you're seeing so much investment being put into hybrids, plug-in hybrids, and electric vehicles across the board, as these emission standards are coming into effect. And it's going to be exceedingly difficult for automakers to really meet these standards without moving their fleet pretty aggressively to electric vehicles. So while there are some kind of questions about what overall consumer demand looks like in the marketplace, and we'll talk about what that is, one of the major reasons why we're seeing this shift towards electric vehicles is this kind of stick that's out there. And these targets can move, but they are moving up. And we really haven't even gotten to the 2026 and beyond data yet. I'm sure EPA is going to be working on those stats relatively quickly. But if some of the targets that have been bandied about out there, we're going to see these emission levels continue to move up. And that's really going to push the market towards electric vehicles at a more aggressive rate than what we've seen before. So when we talk about those targets and what they actually look like, they're rather aggressive. And depending who you talk to, you'll see different numbers. So two different things on here. You can see the Biden administration's goal. This is not a locked in number, but kind of a goal of where they want to be by 2030, which is getting up to around like 50% of sales being electric vehicles. New EV sales right now, I believe year-to-date data is around 7.5% of total national sales are EVs. So if you think about that, we want to go from 7.5% here in 2023 to 50% by 2030. So a rather aggressive uptick in EV targets on that front.
And I'm sure California makes up a tremendous amount of that 7.5%, right?
Yeah, and it's not 100% equal, right? So when we talk about national levels, we'll dive into what that looks like. California, far and away, leading on that front. And so if you really kind of back out California, the numbers would be quite a bit different. Conversely, since you just mentioned California, CARB, so California Air Resource Board, has set its own targets that are even much more aggressive on that front of where they want to be. 2035, 100% zero emission vehicles. So just 12 years out, looking to move 100% away from anything internal combustion engines. With these targets, we never get a real firm answer whether zero emission means that plug-in hybrids will still be allowed. So we still never really get a real firm answer on that one. But these type of aggressive targets are out there. And just know with CARB, I believe it's up to 8 states now have actually signed on to their zero emission targets. So it's not just California, which is a very large vehicle market and leading the way in this front. We're seeing a lot of other states follow along with CARB's zero emission targets, which means that we're going to see a lot of pressure out there to move towards zero emission vehicles, including electric vehicles here relatively quickly. And that's what's really going to be kind of driving the market. That's why you're seeing so much pronouncements, especially from the automakers, that they're going to be producing more and more EVs in the overall market space because they're looking at these emission standards and these targets, and they know they're going to have to try to meet them legally. When it actually gets down to how demand is meant to get there, you can see it's quite varied. And so I just grabbed a bunch of different forecasts that are out there on the marketplace. And you can see that most of the forecasts are showing levels not quite getting to what the expectations are. So the top line there is getting you to roughly 50% of sales by 2030, which is that kind of aggressive going from 7% now up to the 50% number there. And you can see how sharp the acceleration in that line would have to be if we're going to meet that 50% number. And you can see there's a fair number of forecasts that are quite below that expectation as well, including some, it's kind of interesting if you look at different government forecasts, depending where they sit. If they're more on the oil side of things, they're much more hesitant on whether EVs are going to be able to make it. And if they're on the more electricity side of things, they're much more aggressive on things are going to get there. So you'll see the targets are out there and the targets can be moved, but at a certain point between targets we're seeing in the US, we're seeing in California, or we're seeing in other countries, Europe can be actually much more aggressive on the front, same thing with China. These targets are going to be somewhat locked into place. The automakers are going to have to meet them. And then the question is going to become, is consumer demand going to be there to actually move all these EVs out there? Or what we're going to see on that front. So again, kind of interesting environment. Just know that I feel like it's easy to kind of be like, well, EVs, we'll see what kind of happens with them on that front. They've grown quite a bit with regards to sales volumes. But again, with these targets out here and assuming that they are going to remain in place, this is really going to force the market to kind of get to that point. And we'll see how it evolves from that point. Nathan, any thoughts on kind of the standard type of things before we get into how the market's kind of shifted over the last 12 months?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's interesting. Like, the bulk of our stores are in Santa Clara County, which is the heart of Silicon Valley, and we're doing a lot of EVs, and we have been for a very long time now. And last year, Tesla in our county was 30% market share of new vehicle sales. And that's not just EVs. That is actual, EVs and internal combustion engines combined. And it was 1 out of every 4 sales that was an EV in general. So we're, our group is trying to make up that difference there, doing a lot of EV sales. But it's interesting to see how it's really starting and spreading here and how it's starting to take adoption elsewhere throughout the United States. So.
Yeah, you're kind of on the bleeding edge of what that kind of looks like as consumers start to move to that type of market. All right, so that's how the EV market's kind of evolving. So let's talk about how things have shifted. So the market has shifted quite a bit from where we were last year. So set the stage. Last year at this time, June, gas prices were really, really high. Interest in EVs was skyrocketing. Supply was quite constrained. And that's kind of where the market was. We're just kind of coming out of that right now. Now, again, gas prices are going up right now. I think I just saw oil per barrel has hit $96 a barrel today. So oil prices are going back up again. Let's see a little bit of.
Last time I put gas in my car in California, it was $6.39 a gallon per 91. So yeah,
and that is part of the reason why I think EVs are a little bit more aggressive adoption in California. Sure. is some of the gas prices there. So we are seeing that start to go up again. But the market has shifted quite significantly from that time. So we have price declines. We'll talk about that, but used EV prices just absolutely cratered over the past year. Which has really kind of impacted the market. Inventory is going up, and this is new and used inventory. And what you'll find is there's definitely now, I would say the market's bifurcating. There are clear winners on the EV market, and there are some clear losers in the EV market that just aren't kind of picking up that demand. And then we're seeing a little bit of a demand wall that will kind of bring into question about some of those kind of sales forecasts and how we see this going along. So talking about price decline. So this is looking at year-over-year data from CarGurus about how new EV prices have gone on. So you can see there was a little bit of a bubble that took place last year where new EV prices went up quite exponentially, and they've been coming down. So if you look at kind of year-over-year EV prices, I was just looking at the September data today, they're about flat at this point. So New EV prices are relatively flat to what they were around this time last year. And again, we saw a massive appreciation take place when inventory was tight coming out of the semiconductor shortage and gas prices were high. We're seeing a lot of additional prices added onto the price of the EVs, which led to that kind of increase there. On the used side, you can see prices went up just along with the new side, but they've come down quite a bit. A lot of used EV prices are down 40+% year over year. And that is definitely impacting dealerships on that front. Nathan, any thoughts on how you've survived this kind of EV price bubble over the past year?
It's been, the used car side has been particularly painful for us. I mean, in middle of August last year was when Tesla qualified for a lot of the Inflation Reduction Act credits. They lowered some of their pricing to meet those credits. And we, at that point, had like 120 used Teslas across all of our dealerships. And so we took some pretty heavy losses to try and move those cars out at the new market. So now when we're having to do an appraisal on an EV, we're having to look at what the market says and actually hit that number by anywhere from 10 to 20%, just to make sure if Elon decides to do another price change that we're not in a difficult situation with that inventory again. So
yeah, and so Tesla's had several different kind of MSRP price drops on the new side, and that's kind of forced several other automakers to do that. So that's kind of an additional headwind that you're kind of facing on the EV side of this.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and I think for us, like on the new car side, most EV model lines invoice and MSRP are roughly the same number, if not the same number. So we're heavily reliant on OEM incentives for us as a dealer to move that inventory. So when those price changes happen, we had a tremendous amount of EV inventory that was put on our lots to try and meet the demand that you see in the bubble there. And then those cars were sitting and we were waiting for our OEM partners to support us with more incentives to help compete against Tesla. And so that's been a big challenge for us that fortunately, like now they've gotten more competitive with some of those incentives and we've been able to compete again, but there was a lull there for sure where it was difficult.
Yeah, I think it was JD Power came out with data that showed that the incentives on an average new EV is double or triple the incentives that you're seeing out in an internal combustion engine there. I know we have some live mics out there. Any other feedback from anyone on how they've been seeing the EV price market kind of evolve over the past year? Lights are pretty bright, so if I don't see anyone, I apologize.
I'm curious, you're from Detroit. I mean,
Yes.
what has been the EV market for you guys there? And
I see a lot of Mustang Mach-Es, but I will say that Detroit is the strongest leasing market, I believe, nationwide. So I know we get a lot of leases, and we tend to see a lot of leases for Detroit EVs out in the marketplace. I believe it is technically illegal to buy a Tesla in Michigan. We still see them around, but I believe it is technically illegal to buy it there. Sure. So it is coming along, but I think one of the major pain points that we tend to see in the Detroit area is the lack of charging infrastructure. For sure. Particularly if you're staying in the local kind of metro market, it's not that bad. But if you're trying to go further out, as we would say, towards the fingers and the mitten that is Michigan, it gets a little bit more difficult on that front. Yeah. Any feedback? No? So, and this is something we're going to kind of drill into more as we go through this, but how different the national level trends can be to the kind of state and local trends. And so you'll see is that while we've been seeing these kind of price volatility at a national level, it's not happening equally across every state equally. And this really gets into the fact that, we were mentioning California is such an outlier, particularly when it comes to EV. And even within California, there are pockets. You can really see that it's the Bay Area and LA really make up the bulk of the sales that you're seeing take place within California. As you move further north or east, those sales tend to dry up quite a bit. So it's important to note that when we talk about a lot of these kind of national trends for EVs, it's not happening ever equally. And a lot of different states are feeling much different environments. There are a number of states that have little to no EVs in them. And in fact, there's a large number of dealerships that barely have one EV on their lot, let alone 3. So as consumers are starting to come into the EV marketplace and they're starting to show interest into this, just know that, I'm sure in the Bay Area, it's a little bit easier to find vehicles and get a look at them. For a lot of consumers, they might be interested in electric vehicles, but are coming into a marketplace where it's actually tough to actually see one in person, let alone go on a test drive and experience what that electric vehicle looks like. So it remains a little bit of a difficult challenge there. Nathan, any thoughts about how California's kind of, have you seen them kind of, are the national trends we're looking at with the price trends, is California roughly following those, or is it even more kind of outsized impact?
So I think, we're at this interesting point where we now have enough selection of new models. Like, it used to just be, if you produced an EV, it's sold, right? Like, you couldn't keep them on the lot. It was very, very easy. Now we're starting to get to sort of a market saturation where there's enough selection for people to go through. And what's been interesting is, now we've actually seen like, 1 or 2 duds. Like, we're a Genesis dealer, and the electrified G80 has been really, really poor for us. And so it's not sort of maybe, where manufacturers thought, oh, if I just produce more EVs, I'm going to sell them. And so now we start to see inventory creeping up. We actually ran into a situation where we were doing inventory reports on our inventory, and we decided to finally look at EVs separate from internal combustion engines. And we found that in July, when we were going into August, we had roughly an 18-day supply of internal combustion engine vehicles, but we had a 45-day supply of EVs. And so we actually had to run a marketing campaign to sort of showcase DGDG as like the place to go if you're looking for a new EV in Northern California, to help drive more traffic on EVs, to help move that supply. But it's been interesting to see supply finally coming up and meeting the demand curve that we had, and now sort of seeing things collecting on lots if people aren't careful.
So I'm assuming similar type trend on days to turn, how quickly those, I'm sure the EVs were relatively flying off last year, and now, they're not seeing that quite that.
Yeah, and selling them with markup and things like that. Yeah. And now we're at MSRP or discounts to be more competitive.
Yeah, and so you can see here the top 10 used price declining EVs year over year, and so you can see that I know Tesla tends to get a lot of love in the marketplace, but Teslas have seen a lot of decline in the marketplace. And so one of the things that I think is going to be challenging both on the dealer side and on the consumer side is the amount of price volatility we've seen out here. Nathan already mentioned the difficulty of a lot of these price declines that were taking place on dealership lots, improving profitability or impacting profitability on the dealership level. But I also think about from the consumer point of view, if you bought an EV last year and you look at the residual value of that EV today, you're likely very, very upset.
We work with an EV influencer, and he came to do a couple videos on some inventory. We had a Cadillac Lyriq that he wanted to film, and a Hummer EV, and he had a Tesla Model S Plaid, and we happened to have an RS6, really, really cool wagon on the lot, and he was like, hey, praise my car, while I'm taking these cars out, like, let's see if we can get me a... So he bought the thing a year ago for $130,000, and when we appraised it, it was worth $80,000. So as a Tesla owner, to have lost $50,000 on that investment in that vehicle within a year's time, I mean, that's a pretty tough deal.
Yeah, I just continue to think as we're looking at how adoption is going to grow for EVs with this level of pricing volatility out there, particularly since we know a lot of consumers tend to be underwater. Or we had a couple of years there where people were probably making out when they were trading in vehicles, and now they're potentially going to be underwater coming down from these historically high prices. I think that's going to be another type of kind of shock for the consumer out in that space.
I mean, for us, the vast majority of our transactions with EVs are leases, and so we do have a lot of people that are going to be able to, turn in their car at the end of the lease and walk away, and that's going to be on the OEM and us as the dealers to figure out what to do with those lease returns. But I don't think everyone is going to get hit with that, since such a large percentage of the transactions are leases, and the customer is not going to necessarily take that on.
It's kind of interesting to think about the captives could be the ones who are really kind of being impacted over the next couple of years with some of these, again, right now the losses aren't actualized until that vehicle's turned in, but a lot of those leases were signed a year or two ago when prices were near high. So 2-3 year lease. And so in 2 to 3 years time, we could really start to see some of this impact get in there. And I always just think it's interesting when you see how much Tesla is at the top here. I know Tesla tends to get the most love from the EV side of the marketplace, but they are not escaping this at all. And in fact, they've probably accelerated it with a lot of the price declines we saw. We saw a lot of dealerships and a lot of Teslas see even more aggressive price declines on the used side when we saw the price declines on the new MSRP as well. So again, this is just an additional kind of headwind for dealerships to kind of navigate as we have this kind of EV transition. Pricing volatility is unfortunately going to be one of those things. Now, with gas prices going up, we could see a little bit of a shift here. Historically, American consumers tend to be quite sensitive to gas prices. And when gas prices go up, they tend to start looking towards more green vehicles. Conversely, when they go back down, they quite quickly go back to the types of vehicles they're looking at before. So kind of an interesting thing to keep an eye on there. So that's what's been going on with prices. Now, along with this, and part of the reason why we've seen prices start to go down is inventory's been improving. So again, kind of setting the stage, last year, we were about the worst low point of the semiconductor shortage, I think, right about a year ago, where new vehicle production was near historic lows. New inventory in the U.S. across the board was under 1 million units. Just for context, pre-COVID, we were about 4 million vehicles sitting on dealer lots across the U.S. And so we were down about 3/4 at that point. So we're starting to see inventory come back. We're seeing a lot more new EVs come into the marketplace. And that's where we're starting to see some of these kind of shifts out there. So you can see how aggressively new and used inventory is coming up. I always like to kind of mention new inventory picking up, and this is only new retail listings. So on the new side, a lot of new EVs are direct to consumer. So whether you're looking at Tesla, Rivian, Lucid, and the like, those vehicles will not be captured in any type of retail listing data. So this is only automotive dealership listings. So you can see how aggressively over the last 6-12 months we've been seeing the overall amount of new inventory really start to pick up, and you've been seeing used inventory pick up as well. Again, you'll notice I've tightened down that y-axis quite dramatically, so you can see that bump there. But if we put that up to 100%, it would be a relatively flat line. So just keep in mind that used EVs are still exceedingly small part of the marketplace. Depending on who you talk to, there's about 285 million vehicles in operation in the U.S. And EVs are an exceedingly small percentage of that, a growing percentage, but a relatively kind of small percentage at this point, which is really kind of impacting the ability for used EV sales to be taking place. Again, where are these EVs located? So this time, instead of looking at state level, we looked at DMA level. And you'll notice that California, particularly LA and the Bay Area, is where the overwhelming concentration of all these vehicles are sitting. So both on the new and used side. So, OEMs and dealerships are really locating these where the demand is. Florida actually performs a little bit better if you put it at the state level. When you put it by DMA level, it kind of smooths it out a little bit. And so it's really kind of along the coast. And if the green number there kind of hides some of the difficulties there, but there are large swaths of states and DMAs in the U.S. where there are no EVs at all, or maybe one or two. So just know that when we talk about kind of those national level trends, it's a very kind of different story on that front. And then talking about, I think we can start to kind of get into the concept of which EVs are kind of winning and which ones are kind of losing, so to speak. So this is looking at what makes and models have been seeing the largest kind of increases year over year. And we can talk about that. But Nathan, any kind of thoughts on how the market's kind of evolved? You mentioned before is previously EVs, any EV on the marketplace was a hotcake seller. Mm-hmm. And now that narrative really seems to be kind of switching on that front.
Yeah. It's interesting seeing the Ford Mach-E at the top there because it's been very successful for our Ford dealership. Ford decided to take a similar approach with Tesla, where you are not able to purchase your lease at the end of the lease, and so that will help kind of control the amount of supply that's coming out on the marketplace from the used car side. But yeah, it's this tends to fall in line a lot with what we're seeing.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of the other kind of interesting thing that when I look at this is on the new side, you see a lot of the kind of newer names that are coming out there. But on the used side, it's kind of like the old greatest hits of EVs that were, I mean, the Nissan Leaf is relatively small volume sales at this point, but it's still, one of the larger growing used EVs out there on that front. So, have you seen any consumer hesitancy towards used EVs? Because I always think about the warranty and the life of the battery and how that might be impacting things in that front.
Yeah, surprisingly not. I mean, as long as you've purchased it correctly and you're able to weather the volatility that's potentially there, there's still demand for used EVs, and we're still selling them, certified pre-owned Bolt EVs and things like that. So we haven't seen, and I think it's been nice because it does make EVs more affordable to other parts of the economy, right? So yeah, people are still interested.
Yeah, my hesitancy, I guess, when I think of EVs is, the battery's warranted for 10 years. The average age of the U.S. fleet's over 12 and a half years, I think, at this point. So, what does that kind of look like? And we'll get into the kind of the maintenance side of things here shortly. So don't want to steal too much of the thunder on that one. Any kind of thoughts on new EV inventory winners, losers? Oh, I think I see a question.
Yeah, and I hate to backtrack towards pricing. I know we just kind of passed that section, but I'm working with data here, so forgive me on that. But as of July this year, I believe the average transaction price, so inclusive of incentives, of an EV was about 10% higher than that of an ICE vehicle. And so thinking long term, if you think back about the price of a flat screen TV in, say, 2000, those are now astronomically cheaper today. You can walk into Costco, walk out, $500 gets you a 70-inch flat screen, 4K, smart TV, the whole 9 yards. So my question for you two is, over the long term, when or if do you see that inflection point coming where EVs and ICE vehicle new prices kind of level out?
That's a good question. So I think one of the things that price difference has been heightened by is the chip shortage, right? So the OEMs wanted to build cars that were as fully loaded as possible to make as much margin on the fewer cars that they were going to be able to sell. So I think now that production's getting back to where things need to be, you will start to see more of the base model type vehicles that will help get that number a little bit better. And then obviously, the incentives that we have from the government to help bring down the cost of these things is definitely enticing, I think, for consumers, and I think that will help drive it as well.
The main number I always try to, it's very difficult to get to this number, but you figure out the cost per kilowatt hour and whether that's going to bring to cost parity between ICE vehicles. And so that's kind of been the major number that I think everyone's been trying to keep an eye on. Now, I think Tesla is basically the only automaker that's reached the scale that they've kind of been able to see some of that benefit, and that's where you've been able to see them really start to bring down prices and try to take market shares, because they've got enough scale now that the cost per kilowatt hour on their EV batteries is there. I don't think most automakers are to that scale yet. And so I think it's really going to be not only an industry average cost per kilowatt hour, it's going to be individual automakers need to reach that cost per kilowatt hour advantage. And that's what the point where they'll be able to have enough margin on it to start bringing down the price of the vehicles or start producing more price points to get there. Again, I think a lot of automakers have started to do the more traditional thing, which is treat EVs more as luxury vehicles. And that kind of lets them kind of pay for it while they're getting to that point. Once we see more mainstream EVs come into the marketplace, and I think you're starting to see some automakers do that. I believe GM's got an EV Equinox coming that they're looking at a $35,000 price point on.
Yep.
Once you start seeing more vehicles like that hit the marketplace, then I think you're going to start to see that more kind of cost parity hit the market.
Yeah, I mean, historically, it was really just the Chevy Bolt that was kind of at that comparable price point with the Model 3 and things like that. So we'll start to see more selection drive that down as well.
It's also helpful that the automakers are starting to build EVs and the body types that people actually like. A lot of the initial EVs were cars, and Americans really don't like buying cars at this point anymore, which I really think kind of helped hold things back on that front. Now we're starting to see more kind of trucks, and I really think once you start seeing electric CUVs get into the marketplace, and at more attractive price points that'll really get there. But again, GM, I think, is trying to hit those price points by building scale on their EV battery pack and using, the same kind of modular EV battery pack across all their vehicles, which should allow them to get the cost per kilowatt hour down. That would allow them to hit the price points that they're looking to hit.
They have their partnership with Honda as well to
Yep.
try and do the batteries with them to help get to that scale as well.
Yeah, I think that's going to be kind of the major goal there. Any other questions?
I'll be short-winded as I can and lead to an actual question here. But so Tesla, lots of price changes, but that's really not that different than any other manufacturer, right? We see price changes all the time. As a dealer who owns used inventory, it's difficult when so many of the EVs that are on lots today are Tesla. So we took heavy losses all at once. But if you step back, good for the consumer, right? The prices are coming down. Data is more available, and there's more selection of used EVs out there. What I see a lot, or I feel like I see a lot anyway, is that as a dealer group, we're resistant to the shift to EVs. So, it's kind of our own self-fulfilling prophecy when we see, Tesla drop prices, or we buy one EV, trade one EV and put it on the lot, it doesn't sell. We're like, these things are garbage, right? And so you see a small group of dealers who have leaned in on used EVs, others aren't participating. Perhaps in California, you have to go backwards a little bit. Maybe you can tell us, what that looked like at the dealer level as you got buy-in from, your group, your team to really lean in on EVs. Because I think, when I look at all the data, I always see the one thing missing from it is, are dealers really embracing, are dealers doing the things that we need to do to sell these cars and make a great experience for the people? And Kevin, maybe you can speak to the search side of things. Are consumers out there looking for them, and we're just not converting because we're not creating great experiences at the dealership level?
Well, I mean, if we go back to the map where you had, no selection of EVs in so many of the DMAs across the United States, like maybe there is demand in your market for EVs and there's just none for people to buy. So I think, not having the selection and supply could be constraining your ability to sell cars. And maybe if there was a dealer that took a stance to go and I'm going to go and invest in this, especially if you're participating in an OEM that is going all electric and starting to go that route, it might be you might be the only dealer that they can go and get an EV from. So it's kind of an interesting place for outside of California. For California, I mean, the demand is there, right? I mean, there's so many EVs that are being sold, new and used. And so our biggest thing is just, did we acquire them right, in making sure that if there is some sort of other swing in volatility, are we able to exit that car without taking the heavy losses? So,
And on the search and kind of VDP side, it's so difficult to say on the news side, particularly because it's so much direct to consumer.
yeah.
So, I mean, Tesla would know, but I mean, skip ahead. I mean, Tesla is by far and away the when we talk EVs effectively in the US, we're effectively talking Teslas. They're about 2/3 of the market. They have such an outsized kind of market share at this point. It's tough to know, is the demand there and we just don't have the supply, or is there the demand not there and supplies not really the kind of limiting factor at this point? It's the difficult kind of chicken and the egg approach at this point. I think we'll know more 12 months time when we come back here. I think now that we're starting to see supply start to pick up, we're seeing supply pick up from non-Tesla. I think we'll start to have a better feel of how much real demand there is out there in the natural market and get there.
Yeah, now that you say that, I mean, it'd be interesting to look at like bulk sales data for registration in other markets outside of California, just see what is Tesla's registration rates in some of these counties where other dealers aren't again, don't have the inventory and aren't providing that option to consumers.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at kind of new used sales, so this is kind of quarterly sales data, you can see that the percentage of total sales has been going up pretty consistently, but it's kind of flatlined the last couple quarters. And so this is when we say, like, is there a potential kind of peak in demand out there? I think we'll know more in 12 months when supply's been out there. Has the EV growth that we've seen so far really just been early adopters who are already likely going to be incentivized and were already like, hybrid buyers switching over to EVs? Or are we really going to see a lot of additional kind of opportunities for growth there?
I think so. It's interesting for us. Like some of the demand is people that are fixated on the sustainability aspect of EVs, right? No gas emissions or whatever. But like a lot of our customer base is engineers at Google, Apple, Facebook. These are people that are very smart, that understand how leasing works, and they understand that this is the cheapest way for them to get into the carpool lane in California. And so like there's a lot of demand that's driven by that, not just the sustainability aspect of things. And then I talked earlier about, what I just paid recently for gas, right? So if you have, a lot of Californians have solar now on their homes and are able to charge their vehicle for free at home. Myself, and my wife, we have an EV and a plug-in hybrid and do that at our home. So to help avoid the sting of that gas price that we might have. Now, for some people, like they might have the trade-off that you were talking about, where the EV is more expensive, so maybe their monthly payment is higher, but they also offset that by not having the fuel costs.
Yeah, just cognizant of time, I want to skip ahead and start talking about some of the EVs and dealer revenue, Nathan. Some of the things we were kind of talking about. So I think we had three kind of like boilerplate kind of topics here, but wanted to get to service and maintenance, because I think this is one of the major kind of components that gets kind of bandied about of, parts and service is such a huge component about dealer, revenue, and, not going to have oil changes and filters and all that type of stuff. So any type of, kind of thoughts you can kind of share on how EVs have kind of impacted the parts and service.
Yeah. So it's funny, we so often talk about variable operations and the sales side of things, and we don't a lot of times talk about fixed operations, but fixed operations is what pays the bills when you have a tough time in sales, right? If there's macroeconomic conditions, people are hanging on to their cars longer. It's important. So for us as an organization, we were concerned about this, years ago, and what is the loss going to be in the service department from people not having to have maintenance so much? And what we've actually found is what we may have lost on the front end of the life cycle of that vehicle, we're now making back for that on the back end of the life of that vehicle. So probably the best example I can give you is the Chevy Bolt battery recall that we had. So our Capital Chevrolet store was the #1 retailer of bolts in the country. And so, there were times where for long extended periods of time, we were doing 100 to 200 of them a month out of that location. So when that battery recall happened, that year we actually made $1 million doing the recalls on those vehicles. And replacing the batteries. Like when we have a 5.5 acre lot there, and when you looked in the back, like it looked like a shipping lane. There's just like crates of batteries everywhere, and it took us a long time to go through that. But the labor rate on that, they were paying us for a full day's worth of work, and when you're doing that many battery replacements, your technicians get pretty darn good at it and beating the clock. So it was actually really advantageous for us. So there is less maintenance, but when things go wrong with the EV, they can be quite pricey and expensive.
Is that true with kind of accident repair too? Have you seen anything like that?
It can, depending on the severity of it. If it's just body paneling or whatever, it's that's not one thing. But when you're replacing batteries and things of that nature, like that's where the price tag gets really high up there. So I think that's one thing. One thing that we also ran into on the service side of the equation was our Team Chevrolet location called me and said, "Hey, GM is concerned at our service retention rate." And so we start digging into it when we find that was because of electric vehicles. They don't come back as often for service. And we tried to explain that to General Motors, and they said, "That's great. We still need you to meet these numbers." So as a marketer, I had to come up with how do we market to EV buyers specifically for service to differentiate that from internal combustion engines, and how do we get these people to come in more often? Is it, a mailer with wiper blade special, with a tire special? Maybe they hit a pothole and they need a 4-wheel alignment. Like, what are the things that can bring EV owners back in more often? And then, having a completely different strategy for internal combustion engines.
And now, so just because I'm curious, I've heard that EV owners tend to forget they need to get their tires rotated. And so, in fact, that you're seeing I've heard anecdotally that dealers are seeing a lot more tire sales on EVs. Have you seen anything like that?
Well, and the weight of the battery packs in EVs, you actually do run through the tread on tires more rapidly than you would because of how heavy that car is. And so that is a great opportunity for more tire rotations, for more tire sales, and things of that nature.
So it seems like there could potentially be some front end parts and service loss, but there's also a lot more kind of opportunities out there. But it might be one of those things where you need to get scale. Do you need different technicians? Do you need different types of technicians trained for doing ICE versus?
Yeah, I mean,
EVs?
they all have to go through the OEM training and everything, so they're trained to work on both as they release new models and that. So they're all going through it.
Perfect. I know we already kind of hit on profitability and kind of the extreme volatility prices have been going on. We kind of talked about incentives. Have you seen the Inflation Reduction Act? Used EV tax credit is coming, I believe, and then new is already out there, and it's going to be available at the dealer locations, I believe, starting next year.
Yep.
So any kind of thoughts on that, or how that could potentially be kind of shifting things?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of times where people are trying to buy an EV and they maybe don't really understand the tax credits, and it's really not our job as salespeople to like really be their tax accountant. So they may not, depending on their income, they may not qualify for things. So being able to do it at the point of sale, I think probably eliminates a lot of that confusion of hanging on and waiting till the end of the year and then doing my taxes and then figuring out whether I'm getting a rebate, and if so, how much is that? For us on the leasing side of things, being able to give the $7,500 tax credit at the time of leasing has, again, since so much of it has been lease business for us on the transaction side, that's certainly been helpful to try and keep monthly payments more affordable.
And then leasing has been, I believe, a loophole around content sourcing as well, I believe. So that I think has been able to alleviate some kind of concerns there. And then, market discrepancies. How have you really been feeling about, is charging still a concern? Is range anxiety still a concern for consumers? Do you feel that you need to put charging on site at the dealership? Any kind of thoughts on that type of stuff?
So a lot of the OEM requirements for the EVs is to have a certain amount of chargers available for service customers and for sales customers and things of that nature. What's interesting, I was just telling someone earlier today, like our fixation is for adding even more charging capacity is actually for our team members. We actually view that as a potential retention piece for us. So the average commute in the Bay Area is over an hour. So we have people coming from quite a distance to work at our dealerships. And, they might, there's so much demand for service technicians, right? And so they might get an offer for $1 more an hour to go to another dealership down the street, which is a taxable income event, right? Whereas if we can help reduce their cost of commuting to work, that comes out of that gets back to their net income. And so they might be more inclined to stay with us. And we're doing a huge overhaul right now with our dealerships, put solar on all of them to be able to meet this capacity demand. Because I think our electricity bill now with all the EVs is like $1 million a year as a group. So to be able to offset that is going to be tremendous for us. The payback will be like 2.8 years on that investment.